Hey guys, what's going on? Thanks so much for joining us tonight or today or whenever you're watching this. This is a special episode of Physical Media Coast to Coast because I'm being joined by both Oscar and Joe from Vinegar Syndrome. And let's start with you, Oscar. Let's go ahead and just for people who may not know, what exactly do you do at Vinegar Syndrome? What's your history of? I mean, did you used to work in film restoration or filmmaking? What's your background there?
Yeah, for sure. Nice being here. Nice being here, Paul. I'm Oscar. I'm the archivist and vault manager, which means we have nearing in on 30,000 titles, 30,000 reels in our film archive of varying levels of decomposition, different elements. And basically, my job is to make sure that they're in an actual archive, not just rotting away in some storage locker somewhere else. And everything is cared for. We wind through everything before we actually bring it to the scanning technician, Brandon, and that kind of starts the whole process of restoration. But yeah, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I didn't really start with a filmmaking background, or I studied restoration in Rochester. I believe the title that we worked on was I'm blanking on the name of the movie, but it's something whatever. It was a Technicolor 1950s movie about a kind of ghost ship. If anybody can guess it, you get $10 or something.
I'll send you a Snickers.
Yeah, exactly. Free Bluray. No. But yeah, that's pretty much my gist.
So is that what you always want to do, is like to study film restoration, or did you just kind of fall into it?
Well, I was always interested in the very physical side of things. I always liked being able to kind of handle things and make discoveries and kind of dig through. I like dumpster diving, not really, but I like to people's collections and find cool things or things that I find cool, and then kind of I don't know, learning about the history of these types of things. If you think about it, it's like antiquing for film nerdy people like me, and I was just watching movies all the time too. So big cinephile.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can kind of relate to that. It's kind of like when I was younger and getting into filmmaking, I would look back at some of these older films and think, I would just instinctively think, wow, this needs a new transfer, a new scan, because it was so old, and studios, they just don't maintain what they have in their vault. And then, or something like the place where they're storing it catches on fire. That's happened.
Oh yeah.
And they lose it. So yeah, it's yeah, for people who love film, this is that's something that we tend to think about.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe, how did you get into Vinegar Syndrome and the physical media realm?
Well, I co-founded Vinegar Syndrome, so I guess that's how. I got my, I guess, start, if you want to call it that, in working at or managing or volunteering, some combination thereof, at a video store in Chicago, where I'm from, called Out of Session Movies. And that started formally in 2005. I mean, not the store, but my time there. And as a result of that, I was getting to know a lot of filmmakers, local filmmakers, some people who I was just cold calling and talking to. And I'd been collecting film since I was a very little kid. Since I was in elementary school, I was collecting initially 60 millimeter prints, 8 millimeter prints. Wow. By the time that I got to high school, I was trying to graduate to 35 millimeter and preprint, which is, negatives, various forms of deep negatives and such. It was very much like what I could get my hands on. It wasn't really curated. But as a result of Out of Session, I got to meet a lot more people who were involved in different areas of the film world. And I think, like a lot of people, I started with this fantasy that I was going to make movies and I would be a filmmaker. And then again, while I was in high school, and especially very shortly thereafter, I dabbled in production, and I made some stuff, but it wasn't really my calling. And I found that film restoration and preservation was where I felt most at home and most valuable. And sort of echoing what you said, I would watch awful looking VHS copies of movies and things like that. And it wasn't so much like this assumption that, the material is out there and someone needs to do something with it, but the question of where is the material? When I watched a film that I liked, the first thing that would come to mind would be, for personal, like, collecting reasons, how can I get, at this point again, a print of it? But then when I started to realize that prints themselves were what video cassettes and then DVDs and then Blu-rays served as a functional thing. I mean, prints were not made to be archival elements. They were made to be screened in theaters.
Yeah.
Why so many of the beat to shit prints, especially of exploitation films, look as bad as they do, because they were kept in distribution for many, many years. So the more that I learned about how distribution of film worked during the theatrical era of genre films, I became increasingly concerned about where are the negatives, where are the preprint materials, where are the things that actually would look good and are most important and in need of being maintained. So again, through very random circumstances, I got to meet one of the other people who ended up being a co-founder of Vinegar Syndrome, Ryan Emerson. And then kind of at the same time, through the same circumstances, I met Ralph Stevens, who was the other primary founder, and we all began collaborating on restoration projects. And this was back in 2000, early 2009. I want to say late 2008, early 2009. I could be off, but I think it's about when it was. And at this point, I was much more aware of the technical nuances of different types of film materials, simply through handling them. Seeing, this is an original negative, this is an internegative, this is an interpositive, this is a CRI, this is a deep negative, this is a reduction negative, this is a blow-up negative, and learning how to identify these different types of materials simply by eyeballing them. And I'd also, again, met, as I said, filmmakers, producers, distributors. So very early on, we were offering lab services. And then when that really proved very quickly to not be at all viable financially, Ryan suggested, why don't I contact some of the filmmakers that I know and see if they'll let us release some of their movies or that sort of thing. And that is in part the reason why Vinegar Syndrome was founded. It was also founded, wasn't founded for this, but one of the things that we hoped would come of it was the lab business was clearly failing. So this is something that Ryan had come up with and pitched to me, the name included, because he already owned the domain, to make, to do home video releases. The two of us would do these home video releases, but we would really market them as we are the lab that did all the work, and hope to use that as almost like a press push. And it still didn't work. I mean, we continued to do third-party lab work for a few more years, although by 2017, 18, we had more or less stopped, with rare exceptions. But yeah, that's how I came to where I am.
Oh, so when did Vinegar Syndrome actually launch?
The first release was January of 2013, although we did it with a Kickstarter campaign. This was the 3 Herschel Gordon Lewis films that we had come across in a lab acquisition, Gufanti Film Labs. And Paul Gufanti, who owned Gufanti Film Labs with his father, Paul Sr., was, like many lab people, very attuned to what the law allowed labs to do, primarily in the 1960s and 70s, where there were laws that enabled labs, because keep in mind that when you were making a movie on film, you had to process your negative at a lab. The negative would stay at the lab. Then you get your work print made at the lab, edit the work print, send the negative to the negative matcher. Many labs offered their own negative matchers because, again, it would make it so that they were more consistently involved in the process. And then afterwards, you had your conform negative, and you needed to make prints, which were again done at the lab. So many labs offered credit, and this would be where just like a credit card, you wouldn't pay up front; you could pay over time with interest.
Okay.
And when producers or distributors didn't pay their debts, a lab could, in some cases, actually foreclose not just on the physical negative as a means of satisfying the debt, but also foreclose on the copyrights. And in some cases, producers and distributors would enter into lab agreements that included a lien clause. So very similar to if you have a mortgage on your house and you don't pay your mortgage, the bank can take your house even if you're one payment away from paying off your mortgage. A lab could foreclose on the film as a whole. So Paul Gufanti was very, very into doing that, and he ended up foreclosing on the Hershey Gordon Lewis films. He ended up foreclosing on Massage Parlor Murders, which was another very early release that we actually reissued in 4K last year, I think. So getting to know Paul, who I met through a filmmaker named Sean Costello, was very fortuitous because he mentioned very early on, I have all this material that was all deadbeat clients, and I don't want to pay the storage anymore. You take it. And we worked out a deal to get it, and that included the films that he had effectively acquired the rights to. So we mined that. We also connected with the filmmakers of A Labor of Love, which was a film that Ryan and I had done a restoration of very, very early on, back when we were both in Chicago, and of another film called Punk Vacation, which again, very similar situation. The producer had hired Ryan independently to do a restoration of it, so we were looking for early titles that we wanted to put out. He was like, well, I know the guy who owns this movie, and we already have a master of it. So that's kind of how we initially started the label and figuring out what the titles were going to be.
Now, vinegar syndrome, that is related to film when the negative is destroyed, or
vinegar syndrome is the name for the chemical deterioration of any cellulose triacetate film base. Every single type of cellulose, which is just made of like cotton, essentially cotton or wood linters. Everything changes over time. If you have cotton for too long, it kind of yellows. Similar with film, where basically it'll eventually start decaying, and that process will cause it to actually turn very acidic. So we use many tools to actually measure the acidity. One of the main tools is our nose, but at the same time we also use like AD strips, as Joe said earlier, eyeballing it. But yeah, it can happen to negatives, it can happen to prints, it can happen. The largest, most difficult problem that we deal with the most is quite often full coat mag on triacetate, which is essentially an analog sound format where it's rust on film. So if you ever wonder why, oftentimes it's very rare to hear people talking about what sound form you use. Sorry, we were just arguing about this earlier today. But basically, with full coat mag, it's a really great sound material, but it decays incredibly quickly because rust accelerates the catalyzation, the breakdown of the actual material of film. So that's kind of the name behind the name. But
yeah, and I think it's also just worth clarifying because there's often rushes to assumptions. The notion of color fade has no direct correlation with vinegar. So low fade stocks, which were introduced in the early 80s by Kodak, can still decay in terms of the base breaking down, but the color will be stronger and last longer than an undecayed print from the 70s, 60s, or 50s. So,
okay.
Yeah, don't assume that because something is faded, it necessarily has vinegar, or just because something may look really nice when you watch it, that the elements have no decay.
Yeah, I've been collecting physical media since I was a kid. I have a twin brother, Simon. We've been collecting since we were kids. Beta, VHS, Laserdisc, you name it. And as I get older, the more and more I find out that people don't really understand how it all works to restore film, like to give it a new 4K scan.
Well, can I? Well, first off, I think like the ideal really should be to go for the original camera negative almost
exactly
every single time. I think, every single generation, if you're going to any other film element, the only way that you can get from an original camera negative to a later element, whether it's interpositive or a CRI or an answer print, which is direct from the OCN, that is going to have some generational loss. Whether or not you can see it on a very compressed monitor or whatever, it does make a difference in the actual preservation value if you can go to the OCN. I think the biggest problem is, I think sometimes it's difficult to find the OCN, first and foremost, the original camera negative, and the interpositive is I don't know, if you disagree with me, just say it, but like it's kind of an easier element to restore from. There's less, number one, there's less risk to the irreplaceable element, but also OCNs are physically pieced together. They're joined together. They're different pieces of film which are literally overlapped, spliced together like this. So there is the risk of different forms of oxidation getting into the actual film and changing the actual texture of the actual bonds, keeping each edit together every single time you see an edit. That's going to be an actual, there's literally a tiny little space of air. So if you hold up an OCN to the light, you can see little light through, which to me just exemplifies the amount of oxygen every piece of every little square centimeter of oxygen has moisture in it. So part of what we do too is we maintain an enormous archive where we try to keep the RH down as much as humanly possible, give very fresh air. So every single OCN that's in our film archive is getting the best possible treatment. But there's so much that goes into it. Yeah, crazy. You want to go to the OCN every time.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Unless, but then sometimes you can't find the original negative. I think you did a great video of this with Southern Comfort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
where you weren't able to find the original negative, so you went to the interpositive. Yeah. And I got a few questions from some viewers, and actually someone asked this question. I'm going to throw it up here on the screen. I believe this is the right one. So Aaron Kilburn says, is an interpositive easier to work with than the original negative since it already has approved color grading?
That's absolutely wrong.
Huh?
So the idea that an interpositive, that most interpositives have timing baked into them. Color timing is the lab term for color correction or color grading. Is absolutely wrong. And so IPs were not made necessarily to serve the same purpose as an answer print. Answer prints were, final answer print was supposed to be the properly timed final print. And interpositives Sure, they may have had some timing in them, but very rarely, unless you're talking about big studio titles. And even there, when we've had to work with interpositives that are related to studio titles, they're almost always flat. So, which means no timing or no scene to scene timing. It's just a single light or a lights that have been there to keep things somewhat consistent, at least in within the range of what's able to be exposed on each shot. But yeah, the color correction, digital color correction, is required for every single element we work with. Doesn't matter whether it's original negative, interpositive, internegative, CRI, print. There's no such thing as a perfectly timed element, and IPs by and large were not meant to be perfectly timed elements. They were a record, they were a backup. That was really what their purpose was. They were prior to the development of CRI stop. If you didn't want to make CRI stands for color reversal intermediate or color reversal intermediate negative, you wanted to print off of a dupe as opposed to the original, and you shot in color, you had to make an interpositive, and then from an interpositive make an internegative. And again, in theory, the interpositive would be timed, or the interpositive would have the timing done on it so that the internegative would be timed, so that there would be less work needed to time the prints. But it was rarely done well, and especially when you're talking about genre films. You know, we when we get original negatives in their original cans, we always get timing tapes, timing cards, which were the instructions for the color timer at the lab to know how to effectively do photochemical color correction when they're making the prints. And very often, even on original negatives, you'll see timing tapes or cards that have a single light correction, an overall correction, meaning that when these prints were made 40, 50, 60 years ago, there might have been zero color timing on them. You know, they were all light, and thought, you know, this is good enough, this is close enough, there's not going to be too many inconsistencies, so let's just leave it at that, or only a few corrections. And so, yeah, the notion that IPs are timed elements and therefore they either require less work or they somehow represent the way the film was supposed to look, absolute fable.
Okay. So when you're working with the negative or the interpositive, and say you don't have, you know, you don't have the director or the DP coming in to tell you this is the way it was meant to look, how do you guide yourself on the correct color grading of how it was meant to look, say in the theater?
It's very case by case. Sometimes there will be an older release of the film that is known to have an approved grade or a supervised grade, where the director of DP was directly involved in supervising it, and therefore we can assume that things that may not be apparent in the lighting or the exposure, but were done to achieve a look, were intentional as opposed to compensating for a problem, which again is also something that often comes up with production related issues in terms of lighting inconsistencies. Color gel inconsistencies are a major thing. If you're shooting a sequence and it's a highly stylized sequence and the lighting isn't exactly the same, and there are a lot of different angles or potentially different stocks being used within the same sequence, which again is not very common, but it happens. It becomes extremely difficult to match it. But you know, very often there is a degree of guesswork, and it's ideally educated guesswork where, you know, the person doing the grade is either familiar with the process of photochemical color timing, so they know what would have been possible to do or not do at the time the film was made, meaning, you know, things like digital relighting. which is very common and very popular in modern movies, whether they're shot digitally or on film, where the lighting that's achieved on set is digitally manipulated in ways that would have either been impossible to do with the actual on-set lighting, or were or just being done to achieve a look, like, dropping, like, for instance, the background behind here is bright. Digitally, you can isolate the background and brighten it, darken it, change the hue, change whatever you want about it without affecting other aspects of the frame. Photochemically, you can do similar things, like you can do solarization, you can do other bleach bypass, things like that that may impact the look of the film, but there are many things that you just cannot do on film that are very easily or often done digitally. So colorists are, in some cases, trained to approach older films with this modern mindset of, they're grading a new Hollywood movie or a new commercial, which is even worse. And this is not proper preservation-minded grading. So I think that I'm rambling here now. But,
okay.
Like, if there's an existing reference that we know is a truly approved, supervised older release, we will not necessarily match it one-to-one, because, again, depending on when this was done, it may have been technologically sabotaged as well, based on, this is an early telecine transfer. There were anomalies that could have happened during the telecine that may have impacted the ability to color correct the film or to achieve an intended look. But by and large, we're just looking at every single film as, what would be the logical thing to do. We don't want to clip the brights. We don't want to crush the darks. We don't want to manipulate saturation, unless, again, it's something that was done originally during the theatrical release as a stylized effect. We don't want to manipulate contrast. We just want the thing to match. And there's going to be, again, questions occasionally about day for night shooting, where if something was really poorly done as day for night, unless there's an older, VHS copy that clearly shows that the print that this VHS was made from showed the sequence to be night or a day for night, we have no idea unless we can contextually figure it out based on the soundtrack or based on dialogue or based on the storyline. Like we released a film a couple of months ago called The Fish with the Eyes of Gold, which was part of a Spanish giallo collection. And the colorist who was working on it, there's a really long day for night scene where they're shooting at the sun, but it's a day for night scene.
Mm.
So the sun is like, pointing straight towards the lens. So there's like there's all sorts of issues with flares and things like that. And then other scenes or other portions of the sequence were actually shot at night. So it'll go from actual sequences to bright middle of the day to back to night. And the colorist was asking me, like, what should I do about this? So I looked at the Spanish VHS release of that film, which was taken off of a print, of course. And what they did on that print was they just added a very, very, very heavy, dark blue gel. The entire sequence is just blue. So that's what we mirrored. Like, yes, digitally you could have manipulated the color of the sky. You could have adjusted the exposure of the sky versus the actors, but that's not preservation-minded grading. That's tinkering with how something has always looked, because you may think you're making it look better, but it's not your film to make it look better.
When I started this channel, it's about physical media. Cultivating physical media, cultivating film, and preserving film with physical media. And I don't know if you've seen my videos where I did comparisons between the 4K and the Blu-ray. something that comes up all the time in the comments section, and please correct me if I'm wrong, either one of you. But a lot of times people are saying, well, this new 4K doesn't look like the way I remember it looking on home video or on DVD or on Laserdisc even. And then they have this knee-jerk reaction saying, well, they fucked up the transfer. It's all wrong. It's bad. It's bad. Why'd they ruin it? Now this is where, correct me if I'm wrong on this. My response has been, and I think I learned this when I was younger, when it was VHS, video, Laserdisc, even DVD, because all we had was CRT TVs 4x3. The major studios had to, I don't know if manipulate the image is the right word, but they had to change it to work better with home video viewing, such as maybe changing some of the color tones, things like that. And now with 4K, you're able, like you said, you're able to go back to the original negative and bring it back to how it's supposed to look, or at least as close as possible to how it's supposed to look in the theater. And that's why some people think, well, they ruined my movie because it doesn't look the way it looked when I was watching on video when I was a kid.
I'm definitely going to let Joe take this because the fact that he was just talking about this earlier. And
oh, really?
He said it very perfectly earlier.
Yeah, there are many instances you see of botched transfers. Mm-hmm. Whether that's a DVD, a Blu-ray, or a 4K release, or any combination thereof. And there may not be malicious intent. It may not be like, someone decided, as I was saying earlier, we're going to make this look better. And in the process, they just make it look horrible. In some cases, it's honest mistakes. In some cases, it's not knowing how to take advantage of a new technology to yield the best results, but still the most accurate results. I think that with 4K specifically, it becomes really difficult. And I can say this as we've had to reissue a number of 4K releases, not because the restoration was done incorrectly, but because something in the encoding was done incorrectly, or something in the authoring was done incorrectly. We initially, there was a problem in our initial 4K release of Flesh for Frankenstein, where it wasn't properly flagged to have it so that every single 4K, different 4K players and different 4K TVs should all interact the same. But the issue on this disc was that some TVs read it correctly and displayed the colors correctly, and others did not. Now, if you knew how to use your TV or your player, you could manually make changes to get it correct. But short of that, there was something where people were saying, like, why does this look weird? This doesn't look right. And it wasn't because the master had a problem, it was because the disc had a problem. You also have to keep in mind that most 4K discs, like 99.9% of them, are presented in some form of HDR, whether that's HDR10, Dolby Vision. I think those are the main two. HDR10 Plus, I guess, as well. And when you're grading in HDR, and I don't say this as a colorist because I'm not a colorist. I know the basic mechanics of doing color correction digitally, and I've done it, but I'm not a colorist. So I'm not going to be able to speak with the same level of nuance as an actual colorist. But 4K or HDR grading is, you're dealing with a color spectrum, and more importantly, brightness and saturation levels that were not designed for film. They were not designed to work with a photochemical image, which is not to say that HDR grading is bad or wrong for film. In some cases, an HDR grade is more accurate to what you would see on film, like an IB Technicolor print, which is considered one of the the greatest. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong.
I mean, you're
the
talking
greatest
a lot
dye transfer process.
Yeah, you're talking a lot about Prince tonight. Huh?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Joe hates Prince.
Yeah, and then other color reversal camera films like Kodachrome and Ektachrome both have very distinctive color palettes and saturation levels and favor specific hues over other hues. And in some cases, HDR grading can really allow a film to look closer to what it would have looked like or could have looked like when it was first produced, the way that it was intended to be seen on film. In other cases, an HDR grade can make something way too bright or way too dark, or just boost saturation in ways which are unnatural. So there are certainly, and I can't think of any, and I wouldn't, I don't want to call out other companies. It's not really fair because it's also subjective, because someone can look at something that we put out and say this looks terrible, and maybe you're right. But there's a lot of subjectivity when doing grading, and as much subjectivity as there's always been back to the lab days when a color timer would say, I think this looks good, even if the filmmaker may not have thought that same thing looked good. There's even more subjectivity and more control and nuance available to colorists, especially when you're working in HDR. And therefore, it's really easy to get something wrong. So the assumption that, on the other hand, the assumption that a VHS or a DVD or a Laserdisc is accurate is just as stupid as saying that an IP is, no offense to whoever posed the question, it's a fair question, but, that an IP is a color time source. It's all of these formats. Well, VHS, pretty much every single VHS release of every movie that you've seen on VHS was sourced from a print. So even if it was the telecine transfer was very good, and the image quality of the tape has not deteriorated, and the color reproduction was good, and the exposure levels were good, and it's a really good, accurate representation, generally speaking, of this print, you're still beholden to the color timer at the lab who made that print and the decisions that they made. So it all goes back to a decision that someone in the process made and determined was the best thing to do at the time for any number of reasons. And I actually have found myself, because I very often look on Mondo Digital, which is a review site, and whenever there's a new release of a film and they've reviewed an older release, they'll do comparison screenshots. And I love looking at those because I'm always curious, what do I think? Like, is this new edition a clear improvement, or is it different but not in a bad way, or is it worse? And I've seen the full range as well. Like, I've seen 4K releases that I can look at the DVD screenshot comparisons and think, actually, yes, this DVD probably did have a more accurate color palette. And in other cases, in most cases, the newer release is going to be better because there's certainly been more attention paid, I think, across the board, especially with the genre film companies, much more so than the art house themed companies that do older releases. The genre film companies are pretty much run at this point almost entirely by people who are very knowledgeable of film and very knowledgeable of what film should look like. Because, like in the case of Blue Underground, it's run by Bill Lustig, who was a filmmaker, or Grindhouse, which is run by Bob Murawski, who was a film editor, and Severin, run by David Gregory, who has worked in film, made films for 30 years. So these three companies, Synapse also, Don May has been involved in this stuff since the 90s, and he's very, very technically savvy. Like, these are people who know what film looks like, know what is right and what's wrong. Not that anyone can't make a mistake, but the genre film companies, I think, as a whole, really do come into this with a knowledge base that many of the other companies just don't have because of the people who are in charge.
I think, and to add on that, which is what you said about like subjectivity too, the whole goal of restoration too, like everyone has their own unique experience with a film, but the first time you see a film doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the right way that you're going to see it. Put really simply, the goal of restoration is to bring it as close to the original screening as possible. Not that that is going to be automatically easy to do, because there may have been 20 people in that screening, but you're trying to get as close objectively to that. And the best way is, as Joe said, is to follow the film. If you know the film, know how the film is supposed to look, you can follow those cues to actually get to something a little bit more objective, rather than just doing guesswork or just making up things based on something which is a VHS from a print which was already experiencing some kind of fade, whether it be from preprint or from that actual print back in the 80s already. You know,
bad timing.
Yeah, it's tricky too, because like neither of us are colorists. Our whole like mantra is like, we're both of us are film people, and I think Ryan is the person who started in color grading, but like everybody kind of comes at it from their own perspective. So even with everybody at the company, there are different people who have different vantage points into all of this. But it's through I don't know, committee of educated people who care about the film. That's how these types of decisions are often made, if we don't have a source which can definitively say this is 100% the best version. It's going to be better than the VHS version, which who knows what people are doing. You know, it's just this is like the time when a lot of these things were a commodity, and people weren't really thinking of these things as art. These were commodities oftentimes, whether or not it was a big studio title or something tiny, you know?
Yeah, they really didn't think about the future of preserving the film. And like you said, it released on VHS, and that's the last they think of it, and they put it in a vault somewhere. And so it's like companies like your company, you mentioned Synapse, Criterion, all these different companies are doing some just great work preserving and helping to cultivate film, when a major studio probably may not care less about doing that. And
I would actually counter that to a degree, because we work with a couple of, we work often with MGM and Paramount. We've done a little bit with Universal, and I know people who work at Warner and Lionsgate and so on. And I think that, again, when you're talking about studios, you're also talking about a far more fragmented environment. The people who are handling the film preservation side of things may have absolutely nothing to do with the distribution side of it. They don't have anything to do with the distribution side of things. So, it's actually very wrong to assume that studios are disinterested. Again, everyone has, at studios, the regime changes can shift how things are approached very, very substantially. And I know from people who have worked at studios in the past and have complained to me about, this studio did this terrible thing, or they had this awful policy, how is it to work with them? And I'll say, well, actually, they don't do this at all. They're completely the opposite now. And so, again, right now, the majority of the people who are working at studios in terms of the film handling and the film preservation stuff are people who are also very film focused, and they want things to look good and look correct or accurate. And they're not trying to push the sort of the stereotype of the shitty studio master. And perhaps part of the reason that train of thought still persists is because some companies that license titles from studios, like whenever we put out a film that we get from a studio, we are doing a new restoration, period. We have never used an existing studio master. The closest we ever came was Showgirls, actually.
Mm.
And that was because MGM has the rights, but the film materials are held by the copyright holder, which is a French company. And MGM just literally couldn't give us access because they didn't have access themselves.
Oh, wow.
So we had to, essentially, we were given existing digital files, but I don't want to say under the guidance of Paul Verhoeven, because he wasn't directly hands-on involved, but under the sign off of Paul Verhoeven, we undid some things that had been present in previous releases that were not done or approved by Verhoeven. And so essentially, if you compare the other UHD release of Showgirls to the one that we did, you will notice some anomalies in that release that were introduced for reasons we don't know, but were not done under the supervision or the request of Verhoeven. So, we were able to, even though we did not do a new scan of it, we were able to use the existing files that were already created and improve upon them in ways that actually brought the film to what Verhoeven wanted it to look like. So,
Okay.
but getting back to the whole studio thing, they are very, very willing and open to having us and other companies create new digital masters of their films. They want new digital masters. They want good masters. And unfortunately, some companies that license from studios either don't want to spend the money on it, or they don't have the money to spend on it, or they just don't know or realize that what the 20-year-old HD telecine that they're going to be getting looks terrible. And it's going to do the film a disservice. So, when you see a negative review of a third-party release of a studio title, meaning not the studio themselves releasing it, and the master is bad, chances are that's because they're using a very old master that they didn't even, not because the studio forced them to create a bad master or only allowed them to use a bad master.
Yeah, I think studios have got themselves a bad rap, with the streaming services, and everyone thinks that these studios, all their focus is 100% on streaming, and they don't care about physical media, they don't care about preserving film, just streaming. And so I think that's a lot of bad taste comes from that. But like you say, I've said it too, like what you have said, is that studios do want to, and I have said, why would, say, Universal or Paramount license out their catalog if they didn't want it to be preserved on physical media?
I think their motives are definitely, in that regard, much more that they like the idea that they're going to get a really nice restoration back from some of the companies. But also keep in mind that, again, studios are very fragmented. So the people who are in the home video departments at all of the studios, every single studio has their own home video department, which in many cases is fairly separate from the digital side of things. So the people who are doing the digital placement, the digital curation, procuring the masters for use in digital or television are not the same people who are dealing with the home video side. So there probably is somewhat of a disconnect in priorities in that regard, because the quality and look of a master that a digital streamer is going to want is going to be different than what a home video consumer is going to want. And we've come across this ourselves, where we've supplied our restorations of films that we own to streamers, and they've been rejected because essentially they don't explicitly say this, but the notes are all pretty much always, this looks too much like film.
Oh, really?
They don't use that language,
but
like I had a Spanish company once reject a restoration that we did because they described it as looking too American style. And what they wanted was a waxy mess, because that's what That's what Spanish television broadcast requires. It's not even like, this is this company's own subjectivity. This is what the broadcasters require. They do not want grain. Grain is also hard to compress. And if you're compressing something down to a digital, a really like 720p digital file, and something is really fine grain or really harsh grain, it's going to end up being blocky. So it's easier to compress it if it looks waxy. Speaking
of films looking waxy, I want to take this question here. And if I put you on, I don't mean to put you on the spot with this question. If you don't want to answer it, that's fine, because it's movies that have nothing to do with Vinegar Syndrome. But this is one, and from Retro Girl 99. I wanted your take on the James Cameron 4K movies. I keep hearing hate towards them, mostly with True Lies. I have them, and sure, some areas look a bit smooth, but I don't think it's a disaster or unwatchable. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I think going back to what we were kind of talking about earlier, which is like trying to reach an objective. I think the James Cameron, I think, was he experimenting with like AI stuff? And
yeah. I mean, well, he used newer, deeper algorithms to help with the grain management. I mean, really, James Cameron has made it known he's a stickler for grain. If he went back 40 years ago, he wouldn't have grain in any of his movies if he had a technology today. And I guess a lot of people are taking the AI side, but they're also looking at what's happening in Hollywood with what we had with the strike with AI, and what their studios are trying to use extras to copy their extras and to place it so they don't have to hire extras. They can just copy paste. And I think that when people hear AI, they kind of freak out, thinking that it's not hands-on.
Well, like AI has been used, but it's been used for specific things like stabilization. It hasn't been used for like altering, not for that long. I think like a lot of these, like for instance, like they pinpoint different areas of the image in order to make stabilization happen. I mean, this is a piece of film going through 24 frames per second. You have to figure out a way of stabilizing it.
Well,
but
the AI's
but not done. But the biggest problem is with AI is that this is a training of a software which is going to make its own decisions, and I mean, not to like beat the dead horse, which is continuously going to be beaten by everybody else, but we have a really committed restoration team who are all experts in their own specific areas, and they also know when to step off if it's a certain type of damage which is inherent to the actual film itself. So the thing is, there's a judgment aspect of that too, where it's like, obviously if you're going like shot by shot with AI software, you can make those more objective decisions where you're going to lean off something. But if you're going like, I don't know, if you're gonna be like up-resing shit, it's gonna get really complicated, and it's gonna like incentivize people to use lower quality masters and not actually try to preserve the original element, which is the key to all of this. If you're not actually caring for the element and providing the best quality image, you're not really doing a service to the film itself, I think. Maybe that's a little bit of a salacious thing to say, but like,
I don't know if you guys have seen the 4K of True Lies. Okay.
I've seen clips and stuff from like I saw the news. I got like someone sent me like a little like an uncompressed version of something. So I saw a little bit of the faces and the
yeah. I mean, so I worked in the film industry for about 10, 13 years, somewhere around there, and I've gotten to know some people. I have a friend who started working restoration. Maybe he's done it like 5-6 years, and he was actually on that team that restored The Abyss and True Lies. And he, there's always DNRs and things like that with when you start working on a new project. But he said that by the time this will come out by the time you're able to share this information. And the reason why you want to share it is because to educate people on why the film looks the way it looks. And he said basically the original negative, the perfs were shrunk, and there wasn't a whole lot they could do to really preserve the film unless they went in and used AI to help with the grain level, to help kind of make it look better than it would if they didn't use those techniques. I mean, he didn't go into everything they did, but it's basically what he was saying. How true that really is or not, I can't say.
Shrinkage is a very common thing. All film shrinks.
Oh, okay.
We have film which is horribly shrunk. And again, just like I said earlier, with you can look at something and it looks great when you watch it, and it can be in a horrible state of deterioration, or something might not look very good, but it's chemically stable. Shrinkage is just like I would estimate. Again, I get condition reports on things all the time. Pretty much everything is shrinkage. Shrinkage. There's a certain level of shrinkage where it becomes a problem more so for stability, like image stability, but shrinkage does not affect the color or the other physical aspects of the image. Like shrinkage does not cause scratches, it doesn't cause damage. It's literally just the film is slightly smaller, so depending on how it is scanned, it may have stability issues.
Yeah, and for like to like jump off that too, I think it's like I believe we have a literal device in the film archive, which is a $2,000 piece of analog equipment, a tool which measures shrinkage for things, which is a big argument. This is like worth it, but when we do test for shrink, it's usually to ensure that like if something like pretty standard from things from the 1980s, 1970s, like 70, 60, 70, it's fairly common. It's because of like a wide variety of different like I don't know. I don't know how much you want to go into this, but I think the really important thing to note is that like it does get really complicated with shrinkage, but it should not affect. I don't want to call your friend out, and I don't want to call.
Oh no!
I want everybody to.
I think we should just give information.
You keep interrupting. You know.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess the whole point my friend was trying to make is that there's reasons behind every decision when a 4K restoration is made, especially with these James Cameron movies. And I honestly believe he knew people would be upset over how True Lies looks. And honestly, between what you're saying and what others I've talked to have experienced have said to me as well, it honestly sounds like more like damage control on his end with what he was saying. In the end, we're really never going to know all the facts, what really the reasons behind it, the decisions, which I admit is something I probably should have said in my video. But I was just reporting back from what he told me, and I don't have any experience or hands-on in-depth experience in restoring films, so I trusted what he said, and I just related it back in the video.
It could have been they gave a condition report, and basically it's had a high shrinkage, which is above 1, which is kind of dangerous for projection, because when you're projecting film, typically many archives and like archival theaters like will not project something which is above a certain ratio. Like if it's above 1, people are going to be like, let's not project that. It's going to cause damage to the film. Yeah. But the scanners nowadays, I mean, if you're scanning something, it's going very slowly through a scanner, and it's very safe for the film. So it really shouldn't have been an issue. Still interrupting, but I'm going to let you go.
Right. The other consideration with shrinkage and scanning is, and this is something that a number of, again, mostly former studio people have told me, studios historically had a staunchly do not touch the original negative. That's why we make interpositives. Again, it wasn't about color correction. It was about we make this interpositive so we never need to touch the original negative. The original negative is too valuable to risk any sort of damage. And the biggest fear was photochemical printing, because a printer, which is the machine used to make a duplicate, whether it's a print, an interpositive, a CRI, whatever, is locking the film in place with a claw for every single frame to hold it still so that it can be rephotographed onto another piece of film. Early telecines did the same thing. Same as projectors. Projectors lock the film in place for a 24th of a second with a claw. Early film scanners also did that. But as film scanning very quickly became something that was primarily an archival means, you're dealing with old film, which is going to be more brittle, more shrunk, more prone to becoming easily damaged, as opposed to brand new, fresh out of the camera film, which is going to be fine. It became very necessary for the companies that made film scanners to figure out film transport systems that did not lock the film in place, or if it didn't risk causing damage to the physical materials. So pretty much every major lab, especially the big labs, and I'm sure one of which was where the Abyss was done, whether it was Photochem or Technicolor or Deluxe, probably Photochem if anything, they have pinless option scanners, meaning if the film is determined to be too shrunk so that the pin, which is the scanner version of the claw, could potentially damage it, they will run it pinless, meaning the film is never locked in place. It's held in place optically. So the part of the scanning mechanism is registering the placement of the perforations on each frame and predicting where the perforations are going to be on the subsequent frame, so that when it locks the film, it stabilizes it during scanning, not through the use of a pin or a claw. So again, the shrinkage thing, again, it's complicated. Not having inspected the materials myself for the Abyss, I obviously cannot say anything about their physical.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I wanted to bring up is just going back to grain. Grain is not something that changes over time. Grain is the result of a number of factors. First and foremost, the combination of the stock that was used to photograph the image and how well the image was exposed, meaning if the more light you have, the more balance of an exposure you're going to have, the less likely there is to be really harsh grain. You get really harsh grain when the image has to be pushed, which means the film was underexposed during the production or during the shoot, and the lab basically exposes it more during the developing process to try to bring out detail that might be there, but is too dark to be printed through. So they do an additional basically exposure pass by half a stop, one stop, two stops even, to really bring out all of the image that was captured but may not be visible and would therefore in fact be lost during normal processing. So perhaps he was doing a lot of pushing during the shoot, maybe for stylistic reasons.
We can't really guess about this.
Sure, that's what I'm saying, perhaps. But the other major factor is the stocks themselves. In the pre-1980s, most professional film stocks were pretty slow, meaning you needed a lot of light to get a nice, even exposure. In the 1970s, faster stocks that were 200 ASA, 400 ASA, 500 ASA started to become developed. And then in the 1980s, there was this real push from Kodak primarily to create extremely fast stocks. And that meant that the film needs very little light to get some kind of exposure. But the faster the stock is, meaning the less light that's needed, the grainier the image is going to be inherently. Even if you have it really well exposed, you're going to have much harsher and thicker grain. And we've actually encountered that quite a bit as we're doing a lot more films from the late 80s and early 90s. And there was a Kodak stock family called EXR, which we found is extremely grainy, like shockingly grainy. now that we've done so many of them. It's like, one, you think, oh, maybe again, like this was just underexposed and they pushed it, or they, there was something weird going on with the developing or whatever. But we just keep on having these EXR films, and they're just really, really grainy. And this has actually caused a problem with UHD encoding, because even when you're dealing with UHD, which is a far less compressed file relative to Blu-ray or DVD, the EXR grain ends up being blocky. And there are very few people who know how to properly encode EXR grain. So, but grain doesn't change. Whatever grain existed in the stock due to the production, due to the stocks that were used to shoot the thing, that's been there since day one. That's been there since the film went through the camera. And so, a film, that negative could be stage 3 vinegar, horribly shrunk, major moisture damage, whatever horrible outcome there may be, the grain is not going to change. So any type of grain manipulation that's done is not to correct aging related deterioration. It's simply to change the look of the film.
So I think I'm going to text my friend and say, Joe and Josh says you're full of shit.
Yeah, just start some. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's the overwhelming hate about it that I don't like.
Yeah, see, that's one of those like things which I think is not necessary. I feel like we're like, I think we talked about this when we were talking over the email, where it's just like, I like these movies are coming out. That is a good thing for physical media, the truth of the matter is, restoration is trying to make the best possible version. This is going to be better than the previous versions, but ideally, what you'd want is you'd want access to the version without the AI meddling, and you'd want a version from the best possible element, just straight up with just dust removal and stabilization. A lot goes into that, and it's like, I think it is a question oftentimes, another example is to move it on from this example. I think oftentimes it is an issue of resources, because it's a really costly thing to restore a film. Like currently, I don't know how many passes Showgirls went through, but I believe it passed 10. I believe it passed 10 passes in terms of like that every single we do one reel, which is around 20 or so minutes, a little less than 20 minutes. The restoration team spends that an entire day, 9 to 5, on one reel, and then it goes through multiple passes to go more and more granular, literally. And then eventually, like, you're trying to remove as much of this as humanly possible. That's really costly. But still, if you're touting preservation value for physical media, I do think it's really important to remove the effects of software, which will possibly guess and will possibly change the essence or the substance of the actual material.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, personally, I would have liked it if they didn't touch it. They just, left it how it is. But they didn't, and it is what it is. We'll move on from that. And if you guys are up to answering a few more questions.
Sure.
See here, Jeff here says, what studios, existing or defunct, would you like to work with to license titles?
Well, you're talking to the studio guy. So
I mean, Warner still has some good stuff that hasn't yet been plucked away by other companies. Lionsgate.
Short for that answer. Jesus Christ.
Very simple, short answer. I like it. Next question is from Rich. What are some of the epic searches you've had to go on to find some source materials?
Well, I'm not going to list the best one, but we went 2 days ago to. It wasn't exactly an epic. Well, I don't. Oh, that was. But like, but we went to 3 film warehouses, and kind of we're just hoping to kind of pluck out things, but it was kind of like a legendary collection.
Yeah.
But like,
What is your favorite? Actually, I'm curious.
my favorite. Let's see. Oh well, one of my personal favorites is the one where I was talking to theater owners and random.
Prince.
Yep, Prince.
Yeah.
Basically, I was talking to. It was in Salem. It was in Salem, Massachusetts, Cinema Salem, and they had a bunch of film, and they basically. I was talking to them about they were showing Chopping Mall, and I was like, oh, I love this type of movie. Like this is what we do. We do similar stuff, kind of, not Chopping Mall, but and then basically they're like, oh, Vinegar Syndrome. We have a lot of Vinegar Syndrome. And then basically they showed us me up to the booth, the projection booth, and they had the walls lined with film canisters.
Wow.
From the initial, just looking through, there was this. I'm going to say it. It's fine. It's like the first first what is the name of the biopic of the Lenny Bruce.
Oh.
Yeah, Dirty Mouth.
Yeah.
And it's this very cool movie which starts with the title cards flushing down a toilet to kind of like really, really cool movie which only exists in a few other places.
Wow.
Just that was very I think that was a very cinematic one because it literally started with going into the booth of an old theater which didn't know what to do with this film. So that probably is my favorite, but there are a lot of really gross ones which are my least favorite.
Yeah, we had one around a year ago, which is the largest single acquisition we ever made, where we were 168 pallets, I believe.
Wow.
And one of the people who was helping to pack everything was rat shit on everything.
Oh, no.
We saw some larger shit. Initially, I was like, what person
Who
climbed
did this?
up on this and shit? And one of the guys the laborer who was there, who was a roofer by trade, said, oh no, that's possum shit.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So
I guess it's better than I guess it's better than human. I mean,
Yeah, slightly.
It'd probably be there for many years.
Yeah.
But sort of, if you want a story, this is less of a seeking something out, but an almost lost and found again thing. So when we put out the Rudy Ray Moore films back in 2015, the only material previously known to survive for dolomite was a low contrast print that had been made in the 1980s, and again had really bad. It was doopy. It did not look good. So we did some research and we figured out where some materials might have been, and contacted this facility, and they said this was the former distributor of the film, and they said, yeah, we do have CRI, which would be a first generation duplicate. It's actually the element that was used to make all of the prints. And they had it at a storage facility in England. They were an American company, but they had it in England for some reason. So they said, oh yeah, we'll tell them to send it to you. So it ships, get the tracking, we're checking the tracking, and the sound shows up, but not the picture.
oh, no.
Very worrisome, because we knew they had the picture. So we're checking the tracking. There's just like no delivery date. FedEx says no delivery date.
Well, it's going to cost you extra to get the picture.
So I call it FedEx, and I'm badgering them. And eventually they say, oh, okay, well, we figured out why you haven't gotten this, because it got damaged in transit. The box broke.
Oh, no.
So we don't. So what was in this box? Because all we have here is an empty box with a big hole in it. So I had to explain to this woman what to look for, what a film can would look like. And I said, they're all going to say dolomite on them. And she paused and she's like, huh, dolomite. Okay. She knew what it was. She was clear that she knew what it was. And so she calls me back maybe an hour later and she says, I found them. And sent them, and that was just such an incredible, I think I went with James actually to the FedEx. Maybe it was Brandon or Chris, but I went with someone, one of the people who's been in Vinegar Syndrome for a very long time, to this FedEx that's like a 20-minute drive from our building, because I wanted, before, I would sign the paperwork absolving them of responsibility. I wanted to make sure that it was all there and that it was all not, crushed. And luckily, everything, the cans hadn't opened. The film was in excellent condition.
Wow.
And that absolute nightmare for a few days was resolved. And the reason the box broke, by the way, and this is a rare time where I will not blame FedEx for something, was not because of FedEx's handling. It was because the place in England that had it decided that it made sense to ship it in the box that they'd had it in since the 80s.
Oh, geez. Are you serious?
Yeah.
But to add to that too, now, because we do a lot of shipment of negatives these days too, so it's even that story has kind of echoed and reverberated through our walls. And now every single time we ship any type of negative, we have a tracker in it, just in case. And that has actually helped a few times where I've been able to say, this negative is in this building at this moment. It was
the German stuff.
Yeah, with the German stuff. I was like, this is there 5 minutes ago. I know it's there. Go to that. I called the person at that office. I know it's there. Release it. Let it give us this negative for this lost film. And so now we do that every single time to make sure that nothing ever gets lost. And we've never lost anything.
And we also make sure that the boxes are meticulously taped.
Yeah.
Let's move on to a couple more questions here. Let's see here. Rich says, how are you handling long-time storage of your restorations? Are you relying on digital, the cloud, or are you creating new 35mm negatives or interpositives?
For restorations, we have like a digital asset manager named Lindsay. She sometimes does things and does interviews and stuff like that and presentations, but she is the one handling the 100, I believe it's over, it's closing in on 1,000 terabytes. Where is it?
Wow.
Yeah, terabytes of digital masters. We do not use cloud. There's no plan to use cloud in the near future. It's just, we're very like, again, the company is a physical media company. So currently we use LTOs, and we back them up to multiple LTOs so that one is in one geographic location, another is in another, and we're trying to get to 3. The goal for digital preservation, and I think to some extent like actual physical film elements preservation, is to have it in 3 different locations, 3 really good versions in different versions. So we are trying to build towards a 3rd. In terms of the final question, well,
let me address
okay,
that.
yeah.
So,
I knew you were going to want to talk about that one.
So photochemical preservation is still really the only proper way to preserve film. A digital scan will never be a replacement for a film element.
Mm-hmm.
So ideally, yes, we would make new interpositives of every single film. But that is an impossibility because it is extremely expensive. So, and I don't know how many people are going to be enthused to do this, but Kodak, it's great that they still make film because there really isn't another company out there making color motion picture film. But they are a friend to big Hollywood directors who want to shoot film. They are not really a friend to independent filmmakers who want to shoot on film. To a degree, they will give discounts to productions, but when it comes to the preservation side, sadly, they couldn't care less. And the biggest hurdle to making new interpositives is how much the stock costs. If you have a 90 to 100 minute film, just the stock, just the new stock, to a lab, like if you're a lab, if you are ordering bulk film from Kodak, just buying the stock at your discounted rate is about $10,000.
Jeez.
Just the stock. That doesn't include
all
the
all
labor,
work.
the machine cost, the time, anything else.
And if it fucks up, it's
and
like,
if any
all
mistake
messed
is made,
up.
like you mess up one reel, 1,000-foot reel, you're out $1,000.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
if Kodak wants to promote the importance not just of Tarantino and Christopher Nolan shooting movies on film, but the importance of preserving on film, they need to drop the cost of IP stock. It doesn't cost them $1 a foot to make it. Probably doesn't cost them 10 cents a foot to make it. Maybe it does, but still, the profit margin would surely still be there if they dropped the price to like 25 cents a foot, 30 cents a foot, 40 cents a foot,
Or
50 cents a foot even.
Or like in a less accusatory way, or they could work with us and we could figure something out. It would be really cool. We could make cool prints of fun movies.
Prints, no.
No, sorry. Positive.
Don't say the P word.
Yeah, he doesn't like. If I can list like the 10 things that he doesn't like, I've listed 7 of them already.
So let me ask you your opinion. Why do you think Kodak doesn't want to do that?
Because they probably don't get enough orders for it.
Mm.
I mean,
It's a niche market.
Yeah, it's a niche market, and again, I'm pleased to say that I know with certainty that at least 2 major studios still do new photochemical preservations of everything. Like every single film they have in their catalog, if they do not have a preservation IP, they make a preservation IP just because they understand the importance of having a film element that is a preservation element. And other studios have gone pretty much entirely over to digital, but even these 2 studios, and there might be a third, but I know for sure that there's 2 that do this, they probably don't even do enough of them to be on Kodak's radar. And certainly, new movies are not, for the most part, being preserved on film.
Yeah.
And because they're not being cut on film. And the more lucrative market is for black and white, because the preservation method for a black and white negative is a form of print film or fine grain positive film, very different than interpositive. And so I think that Kodak probably figures, and again, I could be totally wrong on this. If some Kodak rep is listening and they want to correct me, we'll have to talk about the pricing. But there's, I just don't think that they're incentivized, because the places that are doing the most film on film preservation are museums that are getting grants or they have a ton of money, or nonprofits that are getting grants or they have a ton of money. And
they get a specific amount of money, and then they have to like actually reach that amount of money. So it's kind of like you have a little bit more fluidity to kind of charge more for stock and for processing.
Yeah. And so they see it as probably just a niche market and also a racket. They're probably not manufacturing a lot of IP stock, so I doubt it's flying out the door by the millions of feet a year. So they probably actually think that they're doing a great service by even continuing to manufacture it.
Yeah,
which they are. That is a good thing.
It is a good thing.
It is really good.
Yeah, they stopped manufacturing internegative stock a few years ago, which is something that, again, in the modern climate of movies that are shot on film, is completely irrelevant. But in terms of archival preservation, is actually it is just as important as interpositive stock, because internegative stock is the stock used to duplicate color reversal. So camera positive films, you can't duplicate them on interpositive stock, and the only type of film that is correctly balanced to suit a camera positive element is internegative. And now there is literally no way to properly photochemically preserve any movie that was shot on a camera positive film, color camera positive film.
Very bad for anything post 60s and early.
I didn't hear you there.
Very bad for anything post 1960s for low budget feature films and earlier. But
and this also is a huge issue with experimental films and various types of underground films, there's probably a lot more movies that were shot on some camera positive, like more mainstream movies than you think of, and there's now no way to preserve them on film.
Wow.
Yeah, Texas Chainsaw Massacre can't be preserved on a photochemically.
Yeah,
I heard.
True, that was shot in ECO.
Yeah, I heard that. Physical Media Guru, do you think major studios are starting to see there is still value? We already answered this earlier. Still value in physical media, or is it dead medium to them?
Yeah. There used to be at one point, but then I think it was it's a very important question. Honestly, off the top of my head, it's a joke. Off the top of my head, I can't think of the perfect answer. I got a smile out of you. But I think is a good question. We'll bring it up. We'll bring it up to Joe and make it happen. We'll force him to do it. Let's force his hand.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'll tell you. I go on there searching for a hat all the time, saying maybe it's a chance it'll be on there for sale, and it's never there.
So I will say that Ryan, who was my original partner in Vinegar Syndrome, who came up with the name and everything, middle of last year, decided that he, with the strong support of Oscar, wanted to start his own sort of sub-branding for shot-on-video movies called Degauser Video, which I want to be very, very clear is not a Vinegar Syndrome brand. It is Ryan and with Oscar's encouragement, but he did make a bunch of hats, and I begrudgingly put one on one day, and
they look pretty cool.
Very comfortable.
They're very nice, yeah.
So if you want a hat, those hats are extremely comfortable.
Now, are they listed on your website, or
they should be?
Okay. Yeah, I'll take a look at it. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, guys, for joining me tonight. It was awesome talking to you. Me personally, I'm always fascinated by film restoration. It's just kind of what I love to learn about. So I love listening to Joe talk about all the ins and outs, and kind of you get a little too much inside baseball. But for me, I loved listening to it. And it's
straight from the horse's mouth. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I love that you wanted to come on, and we had you on with Oscar. One last question before we wrap this up. Are there any future titles that you can reveal to us?
Well, we're doing. I guess the closest thing to a hint that I'll do is later this year we will be doing another giant monster movie on UHD.
Well done. Done.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm staring at a puzzle.
I got a puzzle for it. So basically, we have the puzzle right there. If we turned the camera around, you'd see it right now. Very cool movie. Very, very fun. Very great poster. Yeah.
Can you hint at what year?
No.
Too much of a hint?
I mean, it's a similar era as Gorgo.
Okay.
Similar vibe.
All right. Cool. Yeah, can't wait for that. Can't wait to see what else you got coming up in 2024. All right, guys, thanks so much for coming on, and hopefully we can do this again sometime and talk more about this. All right, guys, we'll see you. And as always, guys out there, keep physical media alive, and we'll see you next time.